What is up, everyone? Welcome to Elasmocast. Today we have a really cool episode. This is our first episode that isn't really like research based, and I think that you guys are really going to enjoy this. We have Casey Brose on right now. How's it going, Casey?
Doing well, Ben. Thank you again for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, this is exciting. We met at the Arizona Museum of Natural History, which, as an update for you all, I've been working as an intern there for the paleontology department over the summer, and that's been a great experience. And we met when you were bringing us that soft-shell turtle that we got in
hmm
at the museum.
Yeah, and it's amazing how you just, when those things happen, you meet like-minded people. And, I was bringing a turtle to put on display for the museum. And lo and behold, just, there we are meeting each other up. And here we are now on this podcast.
Yeah, and I had no idea that I would meet somebody that's like worked hands-on with elasmobranchs, let alone with the amount of experience that you have, which we'll be talking about in this episode.
So I'm excited. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. And what's your background and how do you get into animals?
Oh man, so it is extensive. I actually had to pull up my resume here. I've been doing it for so long that I've just kind of the time is blurred together. So my background originally, I got a degree in biology, just general biology. Always had a passion for animals, just didn't know what I wanted to do. And strangely, it started with elephants.
Hmm.
Everybody's like, "Wait, how are you working with all these non-elephants?" I'm like, "Well, you figure out ways and things you don't want to do, and then you go forward with things that you do want to do." So I originally started out as an intern with elephants in Arkansas, of all places, shoveled poop for a month and realized that I really didn't want to do that. Not dissing on elephant keepers, but it is a lot of work, but it taught me, I had to work very hard. It taught me self-discipline, and that, there's a real danger when working with animals, especially animals that people glorify. We look at elephants, dolphins, and we're like, yeah, they're amazing. And they are, but they're incredibly intelligent and very dangerous to work with. So from there, I gained a lot of respect. I think that was my biggest thing with the elephants, was understanding the respect that animals deserve, whether they be these highly glorified or under-glorified animals like the ectotherms, that they have to be respected even in a closed environment in human care. So I started off with elephants, and then from there, I moved into field research with a small environmental company. And after that, I was like, I want to become a keeper. So I went to the Phoenix Zoo, started keeping, volunteer keeping with them, with the hoof stocks. So that's giraffe, rhino, oryx, zebra. And then from there, uh, whatever was available. It's kind of one of the, you got to know somebody, you got to network in. And I've always loved reptiles. It's just kind of a thing, you grow up, everybody's got a pet snake or a lizard because they're easy to keep in human care, for the most part, until you actually learn the extents of, the health and care that they need. But that being said, I got a part-time keeper position at the Phoenix Zoo. And from there, I began to work in a professional standpoint of, this is the expectation, this is what has on display, and this is what you got to do to be at a zoo. And I'm like, okay, I got this. I love this. Not only that was I doing husbandry, but I was doing education. I was out front talking to guests and talking, like I said, about the kids. We love talking about our kids. But while I was working at the zoo, it was part of the ectotherm trail, and the stingrays were in there. And during that time, the two ladies that I was working with, one of them went on maternity leave, and my boss came to me. He's like, "Anybody interested in working with Stingray Bay?" And I'm like, "Put me in, coach. I would love to learn about the ocean, because as we are in the middle of the desert, what better way to cool off during middle of July than to get into a pool full of stingrays?" So it was just a really cool chance to dip my toes in, literally, to elasmobranchs, and then begin to learn their care. So I did that for about a year. I was only part time, went full time doing the Stingray Bay at the Phoenix Zoo. And then as time progressed, I went to look for a full time job at the zoo, and it wasn't available. And then I hear about this wonderful place opening up, Odyssey Aquarium. I'm like, you know what? Life's kind of throwing me a little hook here. Let's have to go ahead and take the bait. So I went over there, interviewed with the manager, the vice president, and the director of the facility, not knowing at the time. And they're like, we need this guy now. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I ended up opening Odyssey Aquarium and was bringing animals in daily, cleaning enclosures daily, preparing food daily. I was there about 80 to 90 hours a week, and that was on my own volition because the doors hadn't opened yet. They needed to get the place ready. So that's where my experience professionally has developed. And I was at Odyssey for 6 years with just a multitude of species that were available to the public to view and for me to take care of. And it taught me a lot. And I got diving certification, which was really cool. And then from there, I was able to go out and do research, field research with the Vermilion Sea Institute with whale sharks. So it's just expanded. And, now I'm working over at the Phoenix Herpetological Sanctuary as their animal husbandry and volunteer administrator, overseeing the entire reptile collection there, including the mammals. So it's kind of stemmed from ectotherms in its whole, which I love. So I'm still very much in love with, elasmobranchs. I wanted to become a ray specialist when I was at the aquarium. So I really dove into the ecology, biology, and anatomy of those species and the husbandry because that was what it was every day. So that is my background in ectotherm elasmobranch care and just being around them.
Hmm. And for those that don't know, what is an ectotherm?
Oh, that's a great question. So it's a really cool word you can use in Scrabble. But an ectotherm is simply a creature that relies on its environment to warm it. So it is able to use the energy to move and do its daily processes. We are endotherms. We generate heat within us, and we are able then to go out in the heat. We can go into a cold environment, and we don't have to worry about slowing down or speeding up because the environmental pressure. So endo meaning in, therm meaning heat, ecto meaning outwards, therm meaning heat. So there you go. Ectotherm is just it's relying on its environment to do its natural processes.
Mm. And out of curiosity, what were you doing research-wise on those whale sharks? 'Cause that sounds
Oh,
really cool.
it was spectacular. At first, you're just like, wait, what are we doing? We were cataloging the patterns on the pectoral fin, so just above the pectoral fin on the whale sharks. And we're taking photographs, as many as you could, because they want to be able to identify. But the Institute utilizes a star tracking program for constellations, and they put in the image of the whale sharks' spots, and then they sit there and they make dot points on that picture that then goes into a program that uses it like a constellation. And then, therefore, anybody else who puts that image into the database, the constellation program will then recognize that spot pattern and it will identify that individual or say this is a new animal. And what they're trying to do is track the movement of the whale sharks through the Sea of Cortez and out into the rest of the world, attempting to establish new protected areas and letting people know like these animals that come here, we can't have trawling ships come through and destroy the habitat, take all the natural resources because the whales that are going all the way maybe to Africa or all the way down to South America are coming up here to feed. And if we don't allow them to do that, so it was simply just taking photos, cataloging those animals, and watching their behavior, notifying the staff of any injuries they may see, and then providing a database so people around the world can find out where these animals are going. It was amazing.
That is awesome. And another thing too, for those that don't know, what is husbandry?
Oh, it's funny because I'm so used to saying that word. A lot of people are like, wait, is that getting married? No, no, no. It's a simple term used for keeping or caretaking. It's a term in zoological facilities. Husbandry is, I don't know the exact definition, but essentially giving the animals the care they need to survive in human care via a person. So I am an animal care husbandry specialist, and that just means I'm a caretaker for animals.
Hmm. So you've worked with sharks and rays, and you sent me a list of some of the ones that you have worked on. Could you share the species that you have? Because it's
Oh
pretty
my gosh.
extensive.
It is. I actually had to write this down because after we got talking, there were a few more that I had to address in there. So I've had the pleasure of working with, let's see, one, two, three, four, five, over, it looks like about 20 species of animals, anywhere from the zebra shark, blue spot stingray, ornate wobbegong shark, black tip reef shark, white tip reef shark, black nose shark, leopard shark, bonnethead hammerhead, scalped hammerhead, sand tiger shark, nurse shark, sandbar shark, lemon shark, broad stingray, white spotted bamboo shark, leopard stingray, spotted eagle ray, mangrove ray, southern stingray, cow nose rays, coral cat sharks, epaulet shark, and a California round ray, and also California horn shark. And then there was one last species that I'm just not recalling, but it's extensive. I've had a chance to work with so many species of extant elasmobranchs. It has been a pleasure working with all of them.
And were all of those in the Odyssey?
Yeah, so there were majority of them were in Odyssey, and there was just a little pinch over in Butterfly Wonderland. So I had got a chance to work with that company as well. It's kind of like a sister company to Odyssey that they
Hmm.
had in their collection. So like the horn shark, she
Hmm.
was in their collection, but everything else was over in Odyssey. And then at the Phoenix Zoo, they have the cow-nosed stingrays and the bamboo sharks as well. So I
Hmm.
was able to start there and then through Odyssey just gained some experience. And then also the whale sharks. Don't want to miss them.
Yeah, that is quite an extensive background on them.
You look back on it, you're like, wow, okay, I do know a lot of animals. So
So, what is it like to care for sharks and rays, and what does it take to successfully like raise them?
oh, wonderful question. Um, First of all, respect. I mentioned that. These animals, first and foremost, are feared. It's just because they're misunderstood. And when I got to the aquarium, not once was I ever afraid of what I was doing, only because I understood what I was getting myself into. So when I was told I was going to be taking care of the spotted eagle rays, I was freaking out. Like, yes, like these are amazing animals. I haven't seen them yet in the wild before then. Went to Hawaii last year and got to see one in the wild, which was amazing. But it's really a unique experience because, like I mentioned, a lot of people don't understand them and they fear them out of movies, stories that have been told, Instagram, videos of people jumping in the water in this great white. So I just completely put that all aside and was like, I would love to learn about these beings that live below the earth's water and what are they doing? Why are sharks so feared? And so working with them, you know, it's relatively easy in the scheme of you can just walk away, from that habitat because they can't come out. But that being said, it gives you even more responsibility because you are now making sure that they get the diet they require, the water quality that is needed to keep them healthy. Because you think about salt water and everybody's like, oh, I'm just going to go ahead and take my salt shaker and add it's really much more advanced than that. Adding in salt to keep a certain salinity because the ocean's water is at a certain salinity. We have to provide that for every species of elasmobranch, and that changes. So we're looking at water chemistry. We're looking at diet prep. We're also looking at veterinary care, which we really don't think about sharks needing veterinary care because you just see them in the water. But I've been in a wetsuit, sitting down in a holding pool with a 7-foot sand tiger shark in a sling, and I'm holding the front rails, and the animal's face is like right here. And as intimidating as that was, it was spectacular. To be able to connect with those animals, to be able to see them, to be that close and gain that experience to then provide it for the rest of the world and be like, they aren't scary. They just need to be respected. And we can absolutely get in the water. We just have to remember that this is their home. And so for daily, chores, it was like going in and seeing your coworkers, to be honest. Some of them recognized you. And I think a lot of people don't think that fish or lizards have the ability to recognize people, they totally do. And I just remember going up to the habitats, and I don't know if they could really see me through the acrylic, the glass of the enclosure. I'd like to think so. But when you get in the water with them, as I got scuba certified, you dive down there and they're just hanging out. They're doing their thing. I'm scrubbing. I've got a couple sharks come over and they investigate what I'm scrubbing. And at one point there was this big, beautiful nurse shark, she's probably 6 feet long, who would always get in my business. It didn't matter what I did. I was sitting there scrubbing and she'd come right up and I'm like, you don't want to push them away, but at the same time, you've got this giant shark sitting next to you and you're trying to scrub the coral and she's got her face in there. So they do, they have their own personalities. And it was a challenge. Every day was coming in and making sure that you counted all of them. We're dealing with multiple species in a habitat. So there are dynamics that occur naturally between sharks and rays that we had to accommodate for because you don't want to put in a species that is going to actively pursue and eat rays because that's what they do in the wild. So we looked into species cohab and making sure that the black tip reef sharks could cohabitate with the eagle rays safely without attacking them or eating them. So every day it was like walking through and going, hey, you're okay, you're good. Who's hungry today? That one's looking a little lethargic. Got to talk to the vet. We even counted gill respirations on the eagle rays because it was an indicator of parasite load in their gills. And that sounds, well, how could you have parasites in an aquarium? That's just part of taking care of fish. Aquatics, you can't just drain a 300,000 gallon tank because it's got a couple worms in it. You have to go in and invest and investigate what it takes to give a parasite treatment to an eagle, right? Like, where do you even start with that? And these animals come in, they've been collected safely and with the permits from the wild. And they come in with everything that the ocean has to offer them. So parasites, internal and external, we had to make sure that they were getting the care that they needed to remove those. And so that was something else we were watching for. So it was amazing. Not only were we working with sharks and rays, but we were working with all of the little animals that live on them.
Hmm. That's fascinating. Yeah, and what would like the average day be like when you were working with sharks and rays?
Oh man, I love it was so cool walking in and being like, okay, today it's the eagle rays. Today I got to dive with the sharks. But the average day was get in, check the collection, make sure everybody's behaving well, healthy. No one was looking ill. No one was pursuing each other, whether it be aggressively or mating. We did have mating behaviors, so that was really cool to be able to track. Um, so we do the walk around, check on all of our animals, and then it was food prep. The amount of filleted salmon, mackerel, capelin, I think I'm right up there with possibly like a introductory chef at this point for filleting fish. We're talking if you're just doing a small habitat of stingrays, that's about 20 pounds of food, that I have to go in and chop up, detail all the shrimp. And then from there, it's okay, now what do the sharks need? Getting a 5 pound bucket full of mackerel, chopping that up, making sure these food items can go into the animals because you can't just give them a whole salmon, if the shark's only 3 feet long. So then
Hmm.
you had to chop it up and then you had to add vitamins, believe it or not. They need their vitamins as well. So we prepare their diet, we go and feed them, make sure we got their breakfast. And then from there, it was maintenance. And a lot of people see the animal care world just through the habitat glass or the fencing. And they're like, I want to do that. It's amazing. I spend probably 0.02% of my time actually with the animals. The other part is job security, and that's the waste they create. Like I said, poop is job security for a zookeeper. So we would clean, we would be doing glass, we would be scrubbing walls, we'd be doing coral, we would be doing gravel backing, which is taking a large siphon and shoving it into the sand to pull up any waste that might be accumulating in the substrate. and because that can go towards chemical differences, and that's the water the animals breathe. So if there's a toxic amount of waste in there, it could choke them and kill them, poison them. So we get in there, we'd be scrubbing, and then there were times where we had to dive. So we'd be in full gear, get down, we'd have somebody protecting us, a spotter, and we'd be scrubbing walkwork. We'd be using a big buffer to clean the walls. And so when we were done with that, we'd take a break, thank goodness, so we could feed these animals. And then we go back to feeding. So they would get two feedings. Some enclosures would get two feedings a day because these animals are constantly burning energy moving. And so it was up to us to provide that so they wouldn't eat their tank mates, their enclosure mates. So we had to make sure we were giving everything food twice a day because they're burning that fuel because they're ectothermic animals. They can't just sit there and hold it in. And sharks have to, most species of sharks have to continue to move, otherwise they suffocate. And so once we were done feeding them for the second time in a day, we would then go back through, check on everybody, tuck them in. I joked, we would read a book to the octopus. We would, tuck the sea turtles in, and then we would leave for the day. And that wasn't a 10-hour day. We would be working for the animals. And that was like any other job, 5 days a week. When we first opening, and that was, I didn't receive weekends or time off in the first 3 months of the opening of the aquarium because it was go, go, go. Now, I mean, obviously they're not going to work in the ground, but yeah, it's a full-time job that a lot of people aren't aware of that we're doing. And even maintaining the life support. Life support, we think about, little things hooked up to the animal. No, it's pumps, the things that you would place on the back of a little mini aquarium that's cleaning the water. Multiply that times 1,000, and some of the cleaning systems were 3 stories tall. So we had to go in there and scrub those and make sure that they were being cleaned so that they could do their job in assistance with the life support team. So it was go, go, go every day. I joked that I didn't have this gray before I started there, but it's a lot of work, and that was pretty much every day. We just get in there, feed, clean, feed, and go home.
Yeah. And which sharks were easy and which sharks and rays were difficult to work with? And like what makes a shark or ray easy or difficult?
No, that's a really cool question. Easy and difficult really is demeanor, to be honest. They can be picky. You wouldn't think about that, but there are some sharks that were just like, nope, not today. I'm not going to eat. And you're like, you have to eat. Like this is otherwise I've seen you without a Snickers bar and you start eating your friends. So uh, some of the easier species to work with were the ones that were highly food motivated. Because you could always deliver medication, vitamins. You get observations on the ones that were highly food motivated. And I say it was easy to do like the lemon sharks because you just go up to the edge of the habitat and they were conditioned to come to a target, which was a bucket lid with a
Mhm.
large X on it or a triangle that was bright red. And the animals would recognize that once that was put in the water, okay, ding, 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 time to eat. So you put that in, they come up, but sitting there trying to hold a pair of tongs with 3 mackerels attached to it to get to this animal that's 3 feet below you, and then they drop it, and you're like, okay, well, now that the black tip is eaten, I don't have to feed him. So they were the bigger sharks that were constantly moving were easier to work with because you could see them constantly. The species that lived benthically, so the ones that are on the bottom, could be a little bit more difficult. So, like the wobbegong, once he went into a big habitat, you never saw him. They are spectacular camouflage artists. Nature did them well by making them almost impossible to see. And he was only, at the time, about 1.5 feet, 2 feet long, and he was in one of the biggest habitats. So, spotting him and then having to take a PVC pole to then drop food down to him 12 feet down while all the other fish are trying to take the food. So I'd say some of the smaller species were even more difficult than the bigger species, but it just depended on the habitat. The eagle rays were always challenging because they too could not stop moving, otherwise they would suffocate. But we had them conditioned to target as well, and we had to hand feed them daily, which
Mhm.
was amazing. I mean, I got to know those animals very well because they came up to me every day, twice a day. But there were days where they're just like, nope, those other fish are bugging me, so I really don't feel like eating. And you're just like, well, I gotta feed you. So I would say some of the easier species would be like the benthic stingrays, like the round rays, the mangrove ray. They're the big round ones that you see. They're like little Roomba vacuums that kind of cruise along the bottom, because they were usually highly food motivated, and they would come up, they'd take their food. But we had a big uh, brown Hawaiian stingray, and she had recently passed. But when she came up to the surface, it was like this giant saucer that was 6 feet wide, and you could not hand feed her because her jaws were so strong. It was literally just dumping food while her mouth, came up open from the edge, and you just sit there and just dump food down into her mouth. It was so, and then she would just splash you, and you're just like, okay, she's done. So I would say, the sharks, specifically the hammerhead sharks, were a little bit more difficult, and I really attribute that to the ampullae of Lorenzini, another big word, the sensory organs on their face. Now, most elasmos, if not all of them, have them, and that's what allows them to pick up chemical and electroreception. And there are the little freckles all over their face. And the hammerheads, with that great big elongated face, were very susceptible to any form of electrical discharge. And you're like, okay, well, why is there electrical discharge in an aquarium with salt water? Well, the life support is generating electric, or it's being powered by electricity. So there might be residual powering from the back, even though it's coming out of a concrete floor. These animals can pick up on that stuff to the extent where at one point we had a beautiful scalloped hammerhead, and the bonnet heads were feeding just fine. I'm like, okay, they're good. But the scalloped hammerhead, I'm like, why are you refusing to eat? You're so good at this usually. And then my boss walked in and he's like, what are you guys feeding this animal with? I'm like, oh, this pair of tongs, we're pulling it out of the bucket, we're offering it down into the habitat, and it's just swimming by. And he's like, the tongs are metal, right? Yeah. He's like, use a pair of plastic tongs. Swapped it out, came right up. I'm like,
Hmm.
wait, what? We believe it was picking up on the whatever charge might have been coming off of the metal on the tongs. That's kind of a stretch to think that way, but he came right up when we gave it plastic. And so it was just amazing. I mean, it could have been a sensory thing for their face or the way that we were offering it to them. But I like to think that, these animals have such an amazing uh, ability that we will never have. And then we had to adjust for that. You wouldn't think about that, that these animals require low electrical input anywhere they go. Otherwise, it disrupts their ability to feed. So, yeah, the hammerheads are probably one of the hardest species to work with. The rays, generally, when they were feeling well, which was most of the time, relatively easy, you could target train them. Most of the animals we could target train. So, the hammerheads were the most difficult, easiest for some of the stingrays.
Yeah. And you touched on it a little bit, but what are some of the key differences when you're taking care of sharks compared to rays?
Yeah, actually, yeah. So I spoke about with the sharks, a lot of those species have to keep moving. They're obligate ram breathers, gillers, because they really don't breathe. So that means as they swim, they have their mouths open. You can kind of see them moving their jaws, and that's because as the movement over the gills, that provides the oxygen. So there are some species like the zebra shark that don't have to sit there and have obligate ram breathing. They just sit there and move their jaws. They pull water in their mouth and eject it out of their gills. So the benthic species, the bottom sharks, the white spotted, the zebra sharks, those animals didn't have to actively swim to feed. So we could then, therefore train them or ask them to do things much easier than like the black tip reef sharks, the lemon sharks that had to continually move. So it was one of those things like, just stay put and I can help you kind of things, you know? So we took that behavior and applied it to their training. And on my resume, it says shark trainer because I have done that. It is a real thing. We trained a 5 foot zebra shark to come up onto a platform, and she would target, nose would come up, she would target, and then we would, feed her. But it got to a point where I could roll her over and we could check her ventral side, and then we'd roll her back and we could get in there and actually lift her up gently out of the water so her dorsal fin was sticking out, and we could do blood draws, which was amazing because we could check to see if she had levels of toxicity or if she was in heat. Those are things that we could check for with that blood sample. But with that species specifically, you could then train them because they didn't have to actively swim. So it was much easier to feed them. With the stingrays, same thing. You have species like the cownose rays that can actively move their mouth, pull water in, and they can lay on the bottom, but they prefer swimming. They have those really sharp pointed fins. And so really the difference between sharks and rays and their behaviors, it just really depends on what they're doing. So those two can be put hand in hand with their care, because there really wasn't like it was harder to do sharks, it was harder to do rays. They were both just as difficult or just as easy. It just depended on the species.
Hmm. That makes sense. And how do you go about training a shark?
Oh man,
How does that
patience.
work?
A lot of patience. They do have, like I said, they have personalities. There was one male zebra shark. He didn't get it. Everything we tried that the female understood, he just didn't understand it, and so we had to go about it a different way, and like look at him and go, okay, these are his tendencies. This is his behavior. We'll cater to that. But the female would come up regularly and she would just investigate. So we utilized that behavior of just investigation to then train her to do such things as target, to allow us to lift her up, take blood draws. And it's a lot of patience. And those who have had dogs and cats know that those behaviors, there are some dogs that get it. There are some dogs that don't. And there's some dogs that can do and can't do. There's some cats that can do and can't do. So it was recognizing that in fish and going, okay, well, this one is showing more tendencies to want to train than this one is. So, and to make it clear, I would never ask an animal to do something it's not willing to do, such as jump through flaming hoops or ride a bicycle. But, if it didn't want to come up, we didn't push it. That's just respecting the animal itself. And so with the stingrays, they were always investigating, and they would come up to you regularly. And we would use that and be like, okay, so they want to investigate. I have food. Let's see what they can do. And first stop is just getting them to recognize a target, an image or a symbol that they could go, okay, that's food for me. And then from there, you would work on tactile. So they would come up to the target. You would gently touch them and see their reaction. And if they weren't about it, they were gone. They never wanted to see you again. You're like, okay, cool. So that animal doesn't like being touched. Then there were some animals, like the zebra sharks, that would actively come up, and sometimes the sea turtles would make it impossible. You would take a scrub brush and you could gently brush the sharks. It was the most bizarre thing. And I attribute that to their natural behavior of going to cleaning stations in the wild, where they meet up with little doctorfish, and those little doctorfish are plucking parasites off of them, or going into their gills and cleaning, or taking algae or barnacles off of them. So we recognize that some species were more open to that. And then from there, tactile, and then it was touch. Like I said, I would never do something an animal didn't want us to do, forcing them to do something. And so it was just, continual introduction of this tactile, engaging their behaviors, watching how they're feeding, and then developing that relationship with them, and them understanding that by doing this, they would get a reward. So they are just as open to being trained or conditioned as a dog or cat if they're willing to. And we had two zebra sharks that were regularly coming up and doing medical checks. And then nurse sharks, these great big purple nurse sharks, they were conditioned to go into like a medical bay to be fed, and then from there it was going in. And I mean, you're talking these are great big 6 foot sharks that at times would even just lay in your lap because for some reason they enjoy just sitting there with you. And once again, it was you just sit there. I never grabbed a shark and pulled it towards me. They would come up and just lay there, And so it was like, what? This shark just hanging out and acting like a puppy dog.
Hmm.
It was amazing. So yeah, it was just repetition, understanding what their reward was, and then asking them to do things that are within their natural habits.
And is it true that rays are sociable animals? Why do they have particularly rays in like the Phoenix Zoo, for example, they have that section, that little pool of them that people come up and like they're able to pet them and everything, and some of them like come out of the water a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. It's really cool to see them. And a group of stingrays is called a fever, which is use that one as a fun fact. So there are some species that are very, very sociable. So the cownose rays, and we've taken that observation and we're like, okay, we can have them in large groups. And there's some sharks, like leopard sharks, that will be seen in large groups. Uh, Sand tiger sharks do commune together, but in the wild, you see them in just small groups. You don't see them in these massive groups like you would see a fever of stingrays. But the stingrays, I think a lot of it has to do with their ecology. These animals are delicious sandwiches for orca and sharks, believe it or not. Sharks love stingrays. They just found out that great white sharks, as juveniles, are primarily feeding on stingrays. And as they get bigger, they then graduate to sea lions and mammals because they're higher in fat. But I say that because we see them grouping like that because it might be just for defense. It's better in a big group to be together because we can then all see there's more eyes involved in watching the ocean. But then you have to go feed that group. So we see their abilities to feed corresponding with their group habits. So, they'll all go down, they'll kind of root through the soil, and then they just move off rather than having to compete. There's a larger amount of food available for these animals rather than, a shark needing to hunt one mahi, it can't share that. So we see the smaller species, I've observed the smaller species being able to fever together because the resources are available and there's more eyes. So it's kind of the same lines along with birds. You've got some species that are they love being in groups, but then you've got like, great blue herons that are solo hunters. So I've seen more stingrays in my professional experience be communal and even other species. So, but they do compete. There was this great big mangrove ray. I named him Roomba eons ago because he looked like a Roomba vacuum cleaner, and he's still at the aquarium. Um, he gets along just fine with some of the other stingrays, but when it comes time to feeding, forget it. This guy is a big push. He'll grab a hold of fins, and you're just like, okay. So when it doesn't come time to feeding, he's completely fine with other species. But when it comes time to actually looking for food, he's just like, back off. I need my space. So I really feel that it just really depends on where they lie within their ecosystem and giving them that ability to then see other predators, be able to feed on a high, providing food system. So that's why we see stingrays typically in larger groups. In my opinion, is because they're a little bit lower on the food chain. So yeah.
Yeah. And what would you say your coolest experience with an elasmobranch has been?
Oh, this is so hard because they've been amazing. I mean, when I first started the aquarium, even at the Phoenix Zoo and that little Stingray Bay, witnessing their intelligence and that they are looking at you. I had the luxury of working with a keeper at the Phoenix Zoo, and she and Lindsay, we worked together on one ray that showed that she was interested in doing the things we were asking. Uh, we went ahead and put a hula hoop in the water with a little stone. And we were like, okay, this is behavioral enrichment. That's just a form of something else that would stimulate the animal rather than its normal environment.
Hmm.
It gives the rays the chance to swim through it. Cool. We went through this ring. We're not asking them to do that. They do it on their volition. But this specific stingray, put it between her nose, and she would drag it around the habitat. This is, and she could get out of it. She would never get stuck in it. And we're like, interesting. And then it got to a point where we would get down and do a hand signal. She'd come up to us, and then she'd go out, grab the hula hoop, and come back with it. And you're like, we just asked her to do something, and she just went and did it. And it was like, so that was kind of my little light that turned on. Like, these animals need more credit than they should get. They're very smart, and they do have their own personalities, and their ability to recognize what we're asking them was really cool. So that was neat at the Phoenix Zoo. The other one, and I mean, anybody who says this, it, whale sharks, I think a lot of people don't understand that they're not a biting shark. You know, you say shark and
Hmm.
everybody's like, nah, they're grabbing hold of things and shredding. They're planktonivores. They eat krill. Their throat valve is like this big. So they can't swallow large items, but their maw is 6 feet wide as an adult. When I swam up to my first whale shark, I was in the Baja California in the Sea of Cortez, Bahia de Los Angeles. And they're like, okay, you see that little fin sticking out of the water? I need you to swim that way. You're like, oh, okay. Open ocean. All right. You know, we nothing, it'll be fine. Okay, so I'm paddling out. I got my snorkel on. We weren't doing scuba. And I just kind of glance up and I see this great big tail just moving. And then as I'm paddling up, you just see the rest of the animal. And if I was crying, I wouldn't know because it was salt water. But I started choking on my snorkel because it was just, I was so gobsmacked by the sheer size of this animal. And it was incredible. They're amazing. They're huge. And the fact that our ocean can support this species was unreal. And so that was an amazing experience. And just being out in the wild with these animals, seeing them in their natural habitats, is just incredible. And then to work with them in a human care setting, is just a blessing because we can then see them even closer. So I would say those two experiences, hands down, were one of the most spectacular with working with these animals and then just diving with them. When I was told, hey, we got to go clean the shark habitat, the biggest shark habitat, I'm like, done, you got me, I'm in. And then getting in there with these big sand tiger sharks, the lemon sharks. I mean, you're just sitting there and they're cruising over your head. I'm within inches and I'm not afraid of them. You know, they weren't showing aggression. They just were simply going about doing their sharky thing,
Hmm.
you know. So that it just those two were spectacular.
Yeah. And you spoke on it earlier about how aquariums they source their animals from the wild. What are some of the ethical challenges that can arise from doing that? And how do aquariums work with that?
No, it's a great question, and it's being aware of this that is very important, and understanding that right now we live in a time where education is very important. And with aquariums, I know there was a huge debate and there will always be, as long as animals are in human care, there's always going to be people who are questioning these things. And I'm on board with that. Like, these animals should be out in the wild doing their thing. The problem is there's not much wild left. And we're doing a very good job of destroying the wild. And that's simply because the humans are doing what we do best, and that's living. You know, we have day to day things. So, my point to this is with aquariums, they do outsource to collect species that are in the wild to bring into human care. And that being said, because a lot of the species that are in human care are being studied to then be perpetuated to breed, and then that way we don't have to remove them from the wild. So a lot of the aquariums, the ones that are doing it right, Odyssey is one of them. I'm not familiar with any of the other practices because I've not worked for those facilities, but they have permits that they have to purchase that go through laws and regulations with countries and then the resources. So we're not just going out there and scooping everything up that we see. That's unethical. What we're doing is we're going through companies that go out and ethically source fish that are in the wild to then bring into human care. Now, fish, thankfully, a lot of species that you see, like the tropical fish on reef habitats, are mass spawners. And so they're making a lot of fish. And not saying that that justifies bringing them in, but they can reproduce faster than some of the bigger species. Now, that being said, some of the bigger species, um, they have been researched and they have been looked at and they have been bred in human care, which you're like, sharks? Yeah. Believe it or not, there are quite a few species of sharks that have been bred in human care. And from that, taking animals from the wild, putting them together, breeding them, we can take those pups and then give them, outsource them to other facilities resourcefully. So we're not taking from the wild anymore. So we are moving through a phase in animal care where it's no longer putting them in an aquarium or a barred cage. We're looking at providing them with the natural habitats to then perpetuate them, breed them, and then outsource them. So we're doing it in human care rather than harvesting. So most of the species that are pulled from the wild, they're not vulnerable, they're not endangered. These are animals that can be removed safely. And actually, in some countries, there are permits to hunt whale sharks, which blows me away that you'd ever want to hunt one of those. But like Georgia Aquarium, from what I was told, at one point went over to one of the Asian countries and said, "Hey, stop. We'll buy the permit. You guys can catch the shark. We're going to take it to Georgia." And like that's a story I heard now, and I don't know if that's exactly what they do. But to me, that's saying those animals were already going to be cold. And Georgia Aquarium was like, we're going to make sure that we put them into a human controlled environment for my next point, which is education. If we don't understand something, if we don't know what it is, we're not going to care about it. And having these animals safely and respectively, and uh, we're taking care of them as they should in the wild. Because there's some facilities that I don't agree with what they're doing, and unfortunately, I don't really know much about them, but I've seen abuse cases, and I try to, it doesn't make any sense to me. Anyway, the point is, when they're taken care of correctly, they provide a chance for people, myself, the visitors to the aquarium, the visitors to the zoo, to see these animals and go, wow, like, that's a shark. That's a stingray. I've never seen one. And then you give them that chance to then go meet them. And it's amazing to watch when people become enlightened with these animals. And I mean that in a good way because they've never had a chance to touch one. They've never had a chance to feed one. They've never had a chance to interact with one. And then all of a sudden, from that interaction, we see them caring. And they're like, wait a second. So you mean this species is endangered? Yeah. Well, I loved Sugar. She was amazing. I wanted like they now relate to that animal and then they want to then go, maybe these habits of humans and their needs to destroy these animals aren't very good. And I'm going to start caring about it. And when I hear about it, I'm going to say something. So it's this very strange web that a lot of people aren't aware of. And at times can be difficult because we do see a lot of abuse and a lot of disrespect to these species. From the facilities I've worked in, my experience and what I'm trying to perpetuate is if we don't have these places, the population of Phoenix, Arizona will never be able to meet a shark because they don't go out to look for sharks, you know, and but they're not aware of the problems that these animals are facing in their natural habitats, so they're not going to care. But the moment you give them that chance to meet a shark or a stingray or go down with them, they then understand that it is important that the habits we have, even here in the desert, can reflect back into the ocean. And that talking to people and not eating certain species will slow down that uh, inevitable end that we are putting towards these species. So we go through most of the facilities I've been at, respectively, do it through permits, are over harvesting, and are perpetuating the animals in human care safely and respectively. So that was kind of a long-winded answer, but I really harp on the fact that I know a lot of people look at facilities like aquariums and zoos and they're like they belong in the wild. Absolutely. There's a problem we have going on right now, and there's not a lot of that left. And so being able to have people be educated and get a connection with those species is just as important as it is to have them in the wild because we're such a huge influence on our world. So hopefully that answered your question. I'm
Yeah.
really passionate about that part, and that's why I do what I do.
Hmm.
So
And what about fish stores? Like I've seen Port Jackson sharks, I've seen those bamboo sharks and things like that, epaulet sharks in these tropical fish stores. Are those a lot of times being sourced from the wild, or are those more so like bred for captivity? And
no,
are they like ethically found if in the wild, or is there kind of like a black market sometimes with these things?
yeah, and it's a good point. So I haven't worked with for a lot of aquarium stores. I have worked for a large corporate pet store. I'll keep their name out of it. And a lot of the species that they had were freshwater, and they were being bred in human care, from my understanding, because they were a lot of them were like live bearers. So it's really easy. You could put a couple mollies together, and they just make babies. And everybody wants a Mickey Mouse molly. So I
Hmm.
knew that they were perpetuating those in human care and not harvesting from the wild. Now, other facilities, I can't answer that question. I don't know. I would hope, especially with epaulet sharks and white spotted bamboo sharks and coral cat sharks, Port Jacksons, a lot of those species will reproduce actively in human care, even as an elasmobranch. And then that allows them to then take that offspring born in human care and then sell them as is. So I would hope they're doing that resourcefully and respectively. But I really can't answer that one for other facilities other than the big corporation I work for. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And what advice would you have for anybody that's looking to buy like a shark array and have it in their own personal home aquarium?
um, no, I never want to discourage somebody from having a pet. It is once again an amazing chance to connect with animals one on one. Yesterday, I was working with my snakes at home. You know, they're amazing. I get a chance to hang out with them. I make sure that they get all the care they need. Water, food, everything. Somebody who's looking for an elasmobranch, first, it's going to cost a lot of money. That's all I'm going to say. You're dealing with a species that, from my understanding, this podcast talks about them being around for millions of years. They have habits. They are susceptible to any level in influence in their habitat. So with elasmobranchs specifically, you need to make sure that the chemistry of the water is within their range. And because if it isn't, they can very quickly tip and die. And it's unfortunate because we bring these animals in. It's like getting a new friend or even adopting a child. You're then taking that responsibility of that animal's life, making sure it gets its entirety for 5, 10, 20 years. Some of these species can live a long time. And then space. Uh, Aquariums, we look at it, we walk into somebody's house, they've got a 10-gallon tank, and it's just loaded with fish. You can do that with some species. With sharks and rays, it is essential to give them space. They're very active animals, whether it be a little round stingray that just kind of flutters along the bottom. They don't need tall habitats. They need something short with a lot of sand so they can bury themselves. And so do your research. Make sure you understand the behaviors and the ecology of these animals before you bring them into your care. Understand how much room they need. Uh, know that you can't put a 2,000-gallon tank on the third floor of an apartment complex. 8 pounds per gallon that might end up on the first floor at some point. So look with what's in your means, understand what it takes for the husbandry. When I talk about water chemistry, that involves extensive care. That's vacuuming the substrate, that's changing out the pads, the filters on a regular basis because that the ocean does a really fabulous job of maintaining its chemistry
Hmm.
by moving it with tides and slamming it with waves and little tiny microscopic organisms feeding on the waste. You have to replicate that in a closed habitat. So if you don't understand how to do that, it's probably not in your best interest to get an elasmobranch because they require so much care. Now, there are some people who've been doing it for so long, they would argue, it's really easy. It's because they've had time, they've understood the ecology, the behavior, they know what it takes. So it's just do your research, know it's going to cost a lot of money, and make sure they have a lot of space. And nobody likes to be cramped up in a little tiny room their entire lives. And then also maybe look into ways of spicing up their life. You know, like that stingray, we put a hula hoop with a rock on the end of it. She loved it, and that gave her a chance to do things that I didn't think a stingray could ever do. So just be a reminder that they, as with any animal, they do have the ability to think, and they are also given the chance to do other things. So it's a commitment if you want to keep these animals in your care.
Yeah. And another thing too, when I was little and I saw that Port Jackson shark for sale and it was like that big from what I remember, they don't stay that small.
Nope, you are so right. A lot of people are under the impression they grow to the size of their tank. And I have to reflect on that comment because everybody's like, well, they grow to the size of their tank because they can't get any bigger. They have literally hit the walls of their habitat, whether it be inches from their tail. But yes, a Port Jackson shark, when it's born, is only about this big, you know, but they get to be over a foot and a half, 2 feet long. And if they can't turn around in their habitat, well, they're going to start getting deficiencies. They're going to have spinal deformities. They're going to stop eating and they're going to die. So they may be small at first, but yeah, I mean, even great white sharks, when they're born, they're over 2 feet in length, from my understanding. But they're the biggest carnivore in the ocean shark wise. They're 20 feet, so everything starts small and it's cute. But remember, you got to get a tank big enough or a habitat big enough for them as an adult. So little stingray can get to be the big stingray, and you need to have that ability to provide them with that space.
Yeah, and that's an issue with a lot of other animals too, that people are buying something when they're young and they don't realize how massive they can get. Like, I'm sure you have experience with people having issues with buying snakes like constrictors when they're small, and then when they get so big that they can't really manage them anymore, then you get some issues like what's happening in Florida
Yeah.
with people just releasing them. And
Hmm.
since that environment is fairly suitable for them. It's pretty similar to their native habitats
Hmm.
elsewhere. They thrive in that.
Absolutely. So working for the Phoenix Herpetological Sanctuary, it's a sanctuary for reptiles. And to your point, yes, we bring in animals daily that people just can't take care of anymore. And, I understand that. Life happens, things change, finances change, living situations change. It's one of those keep in mind things. Sulcata tortoises. Um, I just tell people, I'm like, if you're going to get that animal, get ready to will it. Because they can live to be 80 to 100 years old. They start off, they're stinking adorable. They're the size of a ping pong ball. I've had plenty of relationships with tortoises as little tiny babies, but they're gonna outlive you, and so be prepared to give them to somebody who's responsible to take them for the rest of their life. Because you're right, we not only that, but unfortunately, in every section of our planet where people live, there are pets that are brought in. and then there are people who no longer want them. And lionfish are a huge problem right now along the Atlantic coast of the United States because a pet owner was like, don't want it anymore, and now they're destroying the natural habitat. So if you're going to get one of those pets, we talk about if you're going to get a pet, get a vet. So make sure you have somebody who can take care of them, first of all. I don't know anybody in the valley vet wise who can take care of a shark if it's got problems. And if they do, they're going to be spitballing. And if you guys know of a vet who can take care of sharks in the Phoenix Valley, let me know. Other than the aquarium, and I know he's definitely not going to be going out to look at those animals because he's got his, his collection. But that's the first step. Get a pet, get a vet, and then it's just keeping in mind that this is your responsibility. Snakes, tortoises, elasmobranchs. Unfortunately, there's no sanctuary for sharks, here in the valley, and so you're taking in that animal's life, and that's our duty as another creature if we're going to be taking. And that's my opinion. That's not everybody's opinion, but somebody who very much enjoys the natural world. If you're going to be taking an animal in as a pet, make sure you know what it takes. Do your research. There are plenty of online resources. There are professionals. There are people who are willing to give you the information and then implement them. My biggest thing that I have a hard time with is when people are like, I just don't have the funds. Then don't get it. That's it. You wouldn't buy a fancy car if you don't have money, right? So same thing with a living animal. This is a living creature. It's unfortunate a lot of fish, sharks, bugs, lizards, reptiles are kind of like one of those animals. You can get one, and then if it dies, okay. It's like, oh, it's still a living being. So just be mindful of the ecology of these animals before you bring them into your care.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate having you on, Casey. And one last closing question. I do kind of mold it differently because you're not I mean, you have done some research, but you're not like in the research realm.
Mm-hmm.
So usually I would ask if you were to make one discovery, what would it be in your lifetime? So I'm kind of molding it, and now it's going to be if you were to work with any animal in your lifetime, any animal, extinct or alive, what would
Oh,
that animal be?
extinct or alive? So that's so hard to answer. No, I did answer this question recently about a living species. I would love to work with white sharks. They're incredible. Their biology is amazing. They have been found swimming through deep ocean trenches and popping up in different locations. What? How did they do that? And they change throughout their life, and they have been shown to have like they are intelligent. They are intelligent animals. So a white shark would be a dream of mine to work with, whether it be in the wild research or in human care. I think they're fabulous animals. But extinct, we say these things. We're like, oh yeah, absolutely, Tyrannosaurus Rex, Velociraptor. I work with crocodiles and venomous snakes, and I've worked with sharks. I can only imagine um, 30 plus teeth on two legs with the intelligence of a bird, being able to hunt something the size of an elephant. I'm going to pass on working with tyrannosaurs. I think it'd be amazing to see them. But my biggest one, and this is kind of way out of the sun, a mammoth. I don't know what it is about mammoths, but I've worked with elephants, and I think that they would be so cool to see and to work with, just because of how awesome they are. But ocean-wise, I really, really, really would also like to work with cetaceans, the whales. There's so much unknown about them, and I feel like we're in for a really cool bout of information the more and more we are getting technologically advanced. Being able to track these animals remotely with drones. Um, I think it'd be amazing to work with like sperm whales and orca and humpback, and understanding what they're doing would just be amazing. So,
I
but
think
thank you.
that yeah, I think that there's going to be some groundbreaking research in the coming years on orca intelligence and cetaceans in general.
They talked about AI debunking their voices. And I'm like, okay, if that's the technology we need, and if that's the way we're going to talk to them, Awesome. But well, Ben, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. This
Yeah.
is amazing, and I really appreciate you giving me the time to talk about what I've done. And I really hope a lot of people continue to revere and not fear elasmobranchs and understand that we are in charge of them. We have to take care of them. And the day that my job is done as an animal care keeper and they're no longer in our care, it means that I've done my job. But till then, we don't need to make any more extinct. So
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I know if you guys have stayed till the very end, you're clearly shark nerds like we are. So please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and help this channel out. Hit that notification bell, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode.
take care.